Wait. Before we start, just want to make sure we're clear here. While this podcast talks about sobriety, mental health, and addiction, it is not meant to replace professional medical advice. Welcome to Sisters in Sobriety.
I'm Kathleen.
And I'm Sonia.
And we're ex-sisters-in-law, brought together in marriage and bonded through our sobriety journey.
Join us as we talk sobriety, addiction, and everything in between. You're in for quite a ride. And our Substack is buzzing with amazing content, from creative mocktail recipes to insightful courses and reflective exercises. There is something for everyone. Don't miss out. It's a great way to add some extra joy and depth to your journey. Check it out. Welcome to Sisters in Sobriety. Today, we're joined by Amber Trejo, the clinician and creator of the supportive and educational trauma healing community at Integrative Trauma Therapist on Instagram. Amber uses somatic therapy and nervous system-centered approaches to help people understand how childhood wounds shape their adult lives. She's a survivor herself, a mom, a guide for people moving from survival mode into self-regulation and connection. And today we'll explore how trauma shows up in adults, how somatic work helps the nervous system heal, and what it truly looks like to build safety in the body and in relationships. Welcome, Amber.
Hi, thanks so much for having me on. I'm so excited to be here.
Me too. Thank you so much. So can you tell us a little bit about your early life and what led you to want to become a therapist?
Absolutely. So like a lot of therapists, I've come to find out I had a lot of my own childhood trauma that I was navigating as I was growing up. Of course, would never have labeled it trauma at any point in time until more recently, but definitely realized that the things that were happening in my life were not normal. There was a lot of really big core wounds and abuse and neglect that was happening to me. And it was very easy for me to see that this experience was really different than a lot of the people that I was surrounded by. And never really talked much about my experiences because I carried a lot of shame about those experiences. And like I said, always felt just really, really different, really knowing that things weren't right, things weren't okay. And then as I continued to grow and I continued to heal, I ended up getting married and having children. And throughout those things, I recognized a lot of my trauma was resurfacing in the way that I was responding to my children, the way that I was responding to my husband. And a lot of stuff that I had thought that I was really far removed from and far past because I had left my childhood home. I moved far away and I was far away from, a lot of my family of origin, which was helpful. But what I came to recognize is how much of those patterns really still lived inside of me. And they kind of woke up when I was in this secure, safe attachment and when I first started having kids.
That is so interesting to me. I did the same thing where I got as far away physically as I could. And then, yes, it's like when I was actually in what I thought at the time was a really healthy relationship, that's when some things start to come up. And so is that what we call complex trauma, or how do you define complex trauma, and how does it show up differently than, for example, like single event trauma?
I love that question. And so when I think of my clients with CPTSD, which would be complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and not everyone who has complex trauma has complex post-traumatic stress disorder. However, they often will display a lot of the symptoms of complex post-traumatic stress disorder. When I think of my clients, what I will always tell them is I'm not saying you have CPTSD or that you have complex trauma. I'm saying that these symptoms are often indicators that there's something going on around multiple traumatic experiences, which is really what complex trauma is. So when we think of complex trauma, it's often developmental and it's happening in a very relational context. It's happening with our primary caregivers on a regular basis where there is, oftentimes it's abuse. Oftentimes it's extreme neglect. That's the one part of the complex. I feel like a lot of my clients don't recognize the extreme emotional neglect that they have suffered throughout their life. And basically, the primary way that complex trauma shows up is in our relationships because it is so developmental. It is so relational. And so oftentimes I'll have clients that are just having these patterns around relationships. They're either continuously in relationships where the other person is neglectful or abusive towards them. They're finding these patterns are just kind of repeating over and over again. That's the way that it really is different, is it's relationship. It's in relationship and it's multiple experiences. So what I often will say is like our baseline when we've experienced complex trauma in our nervous system and in our bodies is unsafety. We don't have a baseline of secure attachment. We don't have a baseline of safety, safe experiences. We're very used to always being in that fight or flight mode, always feeling like there could be something coming up around the corner. Whereas like someone with PTSD, their baseline most often is safety. So they're able to recognize when something traumatizing has happened to them and it's shifted the way that they show up, or they're having this sudden onset of symptoms. They're like, this happened to me. And now I have post-traumatic stress disorder because this one event, this thing just changed my life. It changed my baseline of safety. Whereas people with complex trauma, they're often like, I know something's wrong, but I can't put my finger on it. Right. So that's why I say your check engine's lights on, right? There's symptoms coming up and they're often highly relational. And so it's really hard to recognize for a lot of people because they're just so used to, oh, I've never really felt super safe and connected with someone. I've always kind of been like, oh, yeah, I'm just not going to quite get that attached, or I'm going to keep my distance, or I'm going to be really, really like super attached, like anxiously attached. So did I answer your question?
Yeah, you totally did.
Okay.
Very much relates to an electrical issue I had in my house yesterday, which is a few things were functioning at 70% in my house, like a few different appliances. And I was like, this is the craziest thing I've ever experienced. Like my hot water heater, my dishwasher, my washing machine were all functioning at 70%, like weren't finishing a cycle or weren't whatever. And the guy said, there's just a little grimy breaker that I need to clean out. That's like it's providing resistance and it's affecting all these things. And so I know you were talking about relationships, and when we think about anxious attachment and everything, we automatically go to like romantic relationships. But you said becoming a mom also brought up stuff. So this isn't just something, from what I'm understanding, that it's affecting romantic relationships. It's affecting like all the appliances.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. I love that metaphor. Yeah. So, but going back to that, so it's affecting all the appliances, but even with that, you're able to recognize like, oh, okay, this is where it's coming from, right? Like this, what is it that you found?
It's a grungy breaker. He said he pulled it out and cleaned it. He said there's a little grime and grunge in there. I'm like, but how could that have been affecting all these, like how? Like how did this just, and it's like the idea that if you have resistance at the beginning of the system, right? Even just a little bit of resistance downstream causes a lot bigger problems.
Yes. Yes. So that's it. That's perfect in the way of relating it to what complex trauma is. And when it happens, when we're so young, it's so hard to pinpoint exactly what it is. So you were able to figure out, oh, this is what it is. But oftentimes people with complex trauma, they can't pinpoint exactly what it is. And that's the problem, because it's like, it's so many different things and they all kind of combined, and maybe none of them are even what you would refer to as capital T trauma. Maybe it's like, oh, a lot of my clients will be like, but I was never hit as a child, or I was never physically abused harshly. Oh, but like, whenever I would cry, my mom would shut down and she wouldn't talk to me for 4 days. Like, okay, for a child, that's really traumatizing, right? And so, but people don't recognize as trauma. And so, it's interesting how a lot of my clients will come in and they don't recognize what they've experienced to be trauma.
Yeah. Shout out mom. I didn't realize that either. And so,
did that hit close to home? Oh my gosh. So yeah, and I, once again, like I am not one of those therapists. I say once again, because I feel like I always have to reiterate this when I'm on podcasts. I am not one of those therapists, like it's all the parent's fault. However, we have to recognize those experiences. That's seriously psychologically damaging to have your parent disconnected from you and not talking to you and ignoring you and shutting down completely and removing love. Like that is traumatizing to your little child nervous system or teenage nervous system or whatever,
Yeah, no, I do. And so what other patterns do you see for people that seem fine on the outside? And what are some other ways that people who have experienced complex trauma, what are some other ways they kind of mask or internalize symptoms? I was looking at your work and you talk a lot about perfectionism and different patterns of survival. So what are those?
Yeah. So the first question, the patterns that I see are often having this feeling in life that the way that you are feeling about something is the wrong way to feel about it. So a lot of the work that I'll do with my clients is like, you're allowed to feel every feeling, right? You actually don't need to justify why you feel that feeling. It doesn't make it a fact, but you're allowed to feel any feeling that comes up for you. And what I experience with a lot of my clients is they find themselves in these patterns of a lot of invalidation of their own suffering, of their own experiences, a lot of minimization. Oh my gosh, complex trauma it's interesting working with complex trauma survivors because they'll tell you the craziest, like most jacked up thing that happened to them. And they'll always like finish it off with like, but it could be worse. They'll say it with like a big old smile on their face.
I wish my sister-in-law was here because she says that she's like, you have normalized such bizarre behavior. This is not normal.
Yeah, that's a really big thing that I'll see in my clients. So they'll minimize their childhood trauma. They'll minimize all of their feelings and invalidate all of their feelings. Like in the current day, like they don't allow themselves to rest. They don't allow themselves to be human, right? And a large part of this is the shame. So one part of CPTSD and complex trauma is this immense shame. And it's really like this feeling like there's something so wrong with me deep down. Now, so for me, I feel like I'm really good at hiding that. I feel like I'm really good at hiding. No, I am. But I feel like I would never say that out loud, right? Like most people who have these feelings of shame, they don't say it out loud. It might come across as, perfectionism. That's where a lot of mine came across. Not in like detail-oriented stuff. Like I would kind of like slop things together. I'm like, I have some ADHD vibes going on. I'm kind of all over the place. But in the way of like, I don't want you to see that you're getting to me. I don't want you to think that my life isn't perfect. I want you to think that I have all of my stuff together, right? And in parenting, that showed up a ton. And that was something I had to work on so much because it was like people thinking I'm a bad parent or a bad mom or my kid not listening or throwing a temper tantrum, that would send me into a spiral. Like, oh my gosh, they're going to think I'm a bad mom. They're going to think I'm not showing up. What if they think this? What if they think that? That would come up a lot for me in parenting.
And so how do you help your clients recognize those patterns? Do you start with saying everything you feel is valid? Or how do you help? I know with someone like me, even my patterns are probably complex.
They're so complex. And so I think that's the interesting part is that I think a lot of times my clients don't understand that they're even in these patterns, And when I think about the feelings thing, like every feeling you have is valid or whatever, you could say that to somebody and they want to take it in. Like they're like, yeah, every feeling I have is valid. But the way that their body goes into that like automatic mode is that deep down, we don't know that. We truly, maybe our adult selves could hear that and be like, oh yeah, every feeling I have is valid. But whenever we're in a place where we are activated or triggered, that younger part of us is going to come up and it's like, no, that's dumb. Why would you even think that? Why would you feel that? That's stupid, right? We'll shame ourselves for having a normal emotional response. And so a lot of the work that I'll do with clients is inner child work and parts work around what part of us is the part that's kind of like, no, you don't get to feel that way. Right? And how old is that part? And why does that, what could that part be trying to protect you from? And it's a lot of ego state stuff where you're not thinking with your prefrontal cortex, which is what a lot of complex trauma survivors do. We want to intellectualize everything and be like, oh yeah, this is how my trauma affected me. And this is why I'm like this. I am so good at this. I am so self-aware. That was like always what people would tell me. You're so self-aware, but yet I still do the same stuff I always do in my survival patterns. I'm super self-aware, but my body will still go into that younger child mode. That protective part will still come up when I'm activated. So a large part of the work that I have to do with clients is through the parts work and through EMDR, where we're going back to the source of the trigger. You don't feel like you can, like your feelings are valid. You feel like you don't have a right to be angry. Or if you're angry, you're going to end up alone. You're going to, I'm alone. What is that core memory? What is that core negative core belief, right? I am alone. I'm trapped. A lot of these are negative core beliefs that complex trauma survivors will have. So then we have to go back. Where did you first feel like? And figure out where that initial core belief developed. And then we kind of work forward from there. Because if we just talk through it and I just tell them, or if I just said like, why don't you just go in the mirror every day, right? Like this would be like a cognitive behavioral therapist and just say out loud, you're allowed to feel your feelings. Your feelings are valid. I'm not saying that wouldn't be helpful at all. I'm just saying that once our bodies are activated, they're so smart and they're so good at just going into those natural, and our parts too are so good at going into those natural roles that always kept us safe. So we have to go a little bit deeper to get to the core of those patterns.
Yeah. And so I do want to move to talking about integrative healing, but let's first talk about me.
Tell me about you.
Well, so what would you say to somebody like me where I don't have many memories before like the age of 12 or 11?
Oh yeah, that's so common.
So
yeah, with complex trauma, it's super common.
Is that hard then to work with someone? And that is also, and I want to my next question for you is about the different types of therapy. And that is what made EMDR difficult for me, because the memory so in EMDR, you'll explain it to us, but I had to pick a memory and I was just so shaky on the memory. And I kept feeling like, what if I'm making it up? What if I'm making it up? Because I don't have very strong memories before the age of 10, 11, 12. And different therapists have said different things. One is like, well, there's a reason you can't remember. And it's probably, it's protecting you. And other people have said we can, dig into it. It's going to be a lot of work and we can, start to uncover it. And then there's that we could try hypnosis. But what do you say to those 0.01% of people like me that don't have a ton of childhood memories, so can't really maybe even find that age or find that part of them that acts the way they do?
Yeah. So here's what comes up for me when you say that is you don't need to have a specific memory in order for your parts to speak to you. And
but my therapist said, she said, the fact that you feel it is what matters. It doesn't matter what the specific memory is.
Yeah. Yes. And this whole, I'm afraid of making it up. That is so a part of the complex
classic complex trauma.
It really is, because it's like, I'm making it up, right? We will do anything because, and I don't know what your situation was in childhood, but in my experience with complex trauma, our caregivers did that. They gaslit our feelings. They invalidated us. They minimized what was happening, right? And that was how, in a large part, how they survived. Maybe if I make it seem like not that big of a deal, then they won't feel like it's that big of a deal. If I don't acknowledge it or talk through it, then maybe it will just go away, right? Unfortunately, though, it doesn't. And so what we learn, we're kind of programmed in, even if you don't have memories of it, right? Concrete memories. And I'm not saying this happened to you specifically. I'm just saying it happens to a lot of complex trauma survivors, that it's programmed into us to minimize. And in a large part, that's how we survived. And so I almost hear like, well, what if I'm making it up? What if you're making it up?
Yeah, she said.
Like what would that mean?
Yeah.
What if you were making it up?
Yeah. Okay. So when it comes to me and your other clients, how do you then decide what approach you're going to use? If you're going to use somatic work, EMDR, what we think of as regular talk therapy, or parts work, or do you use a combination of all of it for everyone? How do you decide when you have a client?
I always will use an integrative approach. I usually have my concrete steps. Like the first part of therapy is always safety and stability and resourcing for my clients. And I use EMDR and somatic experiencing techniques. I am not formally trained in somatic experiencing. That's like a 3-year program, but I have done workshops on it and I've done a lot of reading on it. And so I'll incorporate exercises from that, but it's all about and polyvagal theory. So what I'll always do with every client is start out by introducing them to their nervous system. What is their zone of safety and connection, and how do they access that more regularly? Because for complex trauma survivors, our system of safety and connection is usually offline, because at a very young age, we learned that connection would be a threat to our survival. So what we just immediately would do is kind of like put that safety and connection, like I'm not going to feel safe and connected with another human being. I might be able to be there with them. I might be able to enjoy being with them, but I'm not going to let my guard down. There's still a little bit of fight or flight in me. So a large part of the work that I'll do is start introducing them to their ventral vagal state and the different zones of their nervous system, and have them tracking or recognizing when they're in each of those zones. So that's always, like, every client I see, I'll usually start out like that. And then I'll add in resourcing from EMDR, which is a lot of like bilateral tapping and just going into different moments of safety and connection, going into different experiences, or pulling in people that maybe were anchors throughout our lives. Maybe they weren't primary caregivers. Yeah. I almost said primary care physician. I was like, oh no, my safety and connection has never been a primary care physician. I don't know about you, but no. Yeah. So maybe it's not our primary caregivers, but maybe it's a friendship we had, or maybe it is a aunt that we had. And so I'm kind of having them go back to those memories of safety and connection and doing something called tapping it in, which is just that bilateral stimulation. And a lot of somatic work of grounding, a lot of somatic work of orienting, which is basically just like looking around the room, bringing your body to safety, doing work like that at first. Okay, that's before I even touch base with anything, and helping build that relationship. I want us to feel really connected, and I want my client to feel really safe before we venture into like any past trauma stuff.
And so that reminds me of the idea of trauma is stored in the body. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Is it more about the body, or how does that connect to the nervous system with those approaches?
Yeah. So the nervous system, I feel like, is a combination of the body and the brain, which is why I love it so much. And I'm sure there's a lot of scientific jargon to behind that. I'll just say it the way that I know it. Like, I feel like it kind of is it's our go-between, right? It's a really easy way for people to start recognizing what's happening inside of their body, as well as what story it is that they tell themselves when they're in a different state. And that's key because the story we tell ourselves when we are in fight or flight, for instance, is often so connected to some of those core wounds from our past. And so a big part of what I teach my clients is like when our body is unsafe, which is part of the polyvagal theory by Stephen Porges, when our body feels unsafe, our brain immediately comes up with a story. And if we're in fight or flight, it's a story of protection. It's a story like, oh, why did she look at me like that? So we'll talk about what are cues of safety and cues of danger, right? We're always picking up these cues of danger and we don't even recognize it. And if we had a parent who, say, was passive aggressive and would always make little backhanded comments, right? Like,
oh, mom. Yeah.
Mom. Yes, I know. My mom was super passive aggressive. Something my husband will always say to me when we're like, when we're in a fight or when we're having a conversation about something is, I'm not trying to attack you. I'm not attacking you. Because I was so used to having to read the hidden message behind whatever anybody was saying. It was never said directly to me. And then when I would call it out, eventually, once I started doing my own healing work, when I would confront my mom about it, she would often be like, oh, no, you're just being sensitive. Or what are you talking about? Right. And so it's really psychologically damaging. And for communication, it always kind of had me going into relationships feeling like you're going to come after me. You're upset with me. Even in friendships, this would come up like you're in competition with me, or you don't like me if I'm doing better than you, or you're saying something that's going to try to secretly put me down, because that was a big part of my relationship with my mom.
I was so lucky that I had one passive aggressive parent and the other one that would explain it and be like, oh, you suck. Okay. Like one would just say it directly.
Oh, I thought you meant that the other parent would explain your parents' passive aggressive. Oh my gosh. So you had one passive aggressive and just one aggressive. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's quite a dynamic duo. So you're getting it from both angles, but going back to your nervous system, right? So then what do you think that teaches you as a child? One parent that's constantly putting you down, and then one parent that's putting you down in a nice way, or like in a way that's under the surface.
Yeah, I'm always trying to decipher what people are saying. And so I don't trust a lot of times what people are saying. It is a tough thing. And I also don't always trust the way I communicate either, if that makes sense. And so I feel the need to be like, you know, how your husband kind of qualifies it with like, I'm not attacking you. Even I'll say, I'm not being passive aggressive. I think I'm still working it out. And I don't know if you have a sibling too to look at where you're like, wow, I see what this could do to somebody. And you know what I mean? Like, so he is sort of the expression of like someone who didn't do any kind of work. And then we'll get into that too with addiction and everything too. So I have sort of like this model of what I don't want to be. And so sometimes when I will have an instinct, I'll be like, well, don't do it. Don't do it. Just take a deep breath and think before you react. So I think, that was like 9 different things.
Well, I think what you're saying, all of it, right, are such core pieces of complex trauma, because you're right. We don't trust our reactions. We don't trust our initial instincts. That's the thing. Like we've grown up around, these models, and there is so much programming that goes into that. And so our initial instincts, oftentimes, we do have to second guess. We're like, oh, wait, maybe that isn't the way to go about it. The way we communicate, everything feels like we're trying to figure out this. It's almost like we know one language, but it's not the language that like is appropriate for other people. So then it's almost like we're kind of like constantly being like, wait, how do I interpret this for you? Or like, how do I say this in a way that like you're going to understand or it's not going to offend you?
Yeah.
And so that's really challenging. And so with that, I think when I hear passive aggressiveness, or when somebody makes a joke about something but it's kind of true, but it's not even super hard. Like it's not harsh. It's not like mean. Like my husband would do that sometimes. That's when I would get really activated. And so that for me is a cue of danger. it's a cue of danger because that was one way where I was emotionally abused as a child, was because my mom would say really mean things to me in a joking way or a backhanded comment. So that's what I'm kind of teaching my clients. What are your cues of safety and what are your cues of danger? And oftentimes for complex trauma survivors, the cues of danger aren't what would be a normal cue of danger for a nervous system that didn't grow up with complex trauma. So for instance, somebody making a joke like that might not be a cue of danger for a lot of people. They might just be like, oh, but for me, it's like, oh my gosh, you're trying to attack me. You're coming after me and you're just not being direct with me. That's another big cue of danger for me as a complex trauma survivor. So a cue of danger for me is when I feel like, and this is, I've noticed the same with a lot of other complex trauma survivors, when people aren't being direct with me and I can feel like they want to tell me something, but they don't want to like hurt my feelings. So they're sugarcoating it or they're glossing it over. Like I'd way rather just have somebody directly tell me something. So basically just thinking about what are the things that activate you and lead you to feeling unsafe. And then what is the story that comes up for you when you are activated? And what is the story that you tell yourself when you're in shutdown mode, which is in dorsal vagal? That's often a story of disconnection. And oftentimes that's when we're like in even a lower state than fight or flight. And we are just hopeless and feel like nothing we ever do is gonna change anything. So why even try? So usually a lot of the people that I work with are cycling between those two states. And they're not in the ventral vagal, which is the story of connection and the story of, I can figure this out. When we're in ventral vagal, we are open-minded, we're curious. We know that everything's going to be okay. We feel understood for who we genuinely are and seen. And so it's about figuring out those moments and helping my clients expand in those spaces so that they can be in that space a little bit more and build up a capacity in their nervous system to handle more things.
And is that done with narrative work, helping people kind of reframe and rewrite those stories?
So it's done by figuring out the states. And I feel like there is a narrative piece to it. But once again, reframing isn't quite enough because it's so ingrained in our biology. So it comes with doing the parts work and kind of going back in and figuring out which part of you is it that genuinely believes that everyone's going to attack you. Like when do you remember first hearing something? How old are you? And doing that type of work. I feel like that really helps the story start to change.
Yeah. And so because we are sisters in sobriety, how do you see addiction functioning as a coping mechanism for unresolved trauma or nervous system dysregulation? Because I feel like that's what I used. It was such a direct line for me from anxiety to using alcohol. That was literally why I drank whenever I could kind of feel, anything bubbling up, any anxiety. I drank to quash this physical sensation. But how do you see addiction?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing that because that's exactly how I see it. Addiction comes in as a nervous system regulation tool. Really, right? I mean, most of the people that I work with, they never learned how to navigate their emotions. What they learned was to suppress their emotions because their emotions were often a cue of danger and a way that they would be harmed. So if they had emotion, they would either be psychologically abused with the silent treatment or shut down or guilt tripped or manipulated. Or they would be physically harmed. They would be hit. They would be disconnected from, sent to their room. I feel like that's also a very extreme case. Like if you're sent to your room every single time you have a feeling, it could cause some trauma. But I don't think sending a kid to their room is going to traumatize them or give them CPTSD from time to time, right? But so what alcohol does, and any substance really, is it just helps us get. I say us because I've had my own struggles with addiction and things like that. And substance use in my early 20s, especially, that was something that I really used before I ever figured out how bad stuff was. It was something that I used so often just to escape. So I think nervous system wise, when you're talking about your anxiety, right, that's a fight or flight state. So a lot of times people who have CPTSD and complex trauma, they're hypervigilant. They're always on guard. They're always tense. I mean, somatically, their body is like always tense. Like if you go to a massage therapist and you have a lot of complex trauma, they're like, just relax, right? Like they're so guarded. And so when I think of you talking about your alcohol use, really your nervous system's stuck in fight or flight and you can't get out of fight or flight because you don't have the tools. So something that you pick up, and it's usually really easily accessible for a lot of trauma survivors. And then you start getting into your teen years, your young adult years, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, I found this tool and now I can relax. Yes. This is amazing. You know what? Like, I'm going to do this every day. Yes. It's literally what it felt like. This is the best thing ever.
The best.
It numbs my emotions too. Like, I feel like for a lot of trauma survivors, it's a big number where it helps us dissociate, right? Like, so oftentimes trauma survivors don't want to be connected to their body. They want to just not be in the present moment. And so substance use is just another way to do that. But somebody who would say be addicted to something like crystal meth or something, they might be more in a mode of so down, like in that dorsal vagal space of just everything's hopeless. I don't feel like I can talk. I feel shut down. I feel tired all the time. And so then all of a sudden, or I feel depressed all the time. And then all of a sudden I do this drug and all of a sudden I can talk to people and I can connect with people. It's also such a substitute for connection for people with trauma because all of a sudden you're drinking. Oh, my inhibitions are down. I don't feel that shame that I normally feel that keeps me from engaging with other people. I don't feel like there's something wrong with me for once. I can go up and talk to anybody and I feel like everyone's going to like me. So we're able to use these substances to get out of those stories in our head and to kind of like trick our bodies in a way out of the neurobiology of, and I don't even know if neurobiology is a word. I feel like it is, but I don't know. But like basically like what's happening in our brain and what's happening in our bodies as a result of the trauma. It's like a Band-Aid. And so we become super addicted to these things because we're using it to even ourselves out and as in a way that other people might not use it.
And I say it, I don't think people love it when I say this, but I do think like there was a period of time where alcohol sort of like saved my life. It really did. I mean, I guess I would have had to find other coping mechanisms, but I wasn't in like a space where I was going to do that. And then it actually, became the problem itself. And so when I talk to people about quitting, I always also talk to them about, having to address a cause, right? And so what happens in your experience when someone just removes a substance without addressing the trauma beneath it? What is really then white-knuckling? And how do we not end up in that pattern of sort of like white-knuckling and then essentially like relapse and then white-knuckling? And can you explain that pattern a bit to us?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you so much for sharing that because it's so true. Even the negative or unhealthy coping mechanisms that we pick up to survive our trauma still helped us survive our trauma. And that's so important to recognize because so many people that I work with addiction, and I see it all the time in the mental health field, there's a lot of shame and such a huge stigma around addiction, right? Once they become sober, they still have so much shame over their addictive behaviors. And having self-compassion really shifts our nervous system from going into a dorsal vagal shutdown state. Like, I'm so bad. What's wrong with me? All those things I did, I was so addicted to that. I needed it this time. I blacked out at this, the stories that a lot of these people who have struggled with addiction have. And I've done it to myself. Instead of shaming ourselves for those moments, being able to just be like, I was hurting. I was hurting so bad. And that was the only relief I found. Being able to have compassion, that it makes sense that you turned towards that and that it did help you survive. That can make such a huge difference in the way that recovery works, right? In our recovery. Because if we go cold turkey and we get rid of the addiction, what's going to happen is the symptoms are still going to be there that drove the addiction. And so it's going to make relapse way more likely. And Janina Fisher, actually, when I did my clinical certification for trauma, talked a little bit about this, about a client that she had who he would drink. He was an alcoholic, and then he would also like binge eat after he would drink. And so he ended up getting rid of the drinking and stopped drinking. And that was a big deal for him. But then he kind of, he went like 6 or 8 months or whatever and was going to therapy, but didn't really develop any of the tools that he needed to figure out what it was that the drinking was doing for him and put something in there that would do a similar thing. Not the exact same thing, but something similar, which would be like relax his body. And he ended up like, he had this moment where it was like, everything was kind of going wrong. He lost his job. He was having a hard time. And he ended up just saying, you know what, fuck it, I'm going to get a beer. And then he went and after he had some beers, he went and he got his burgers and he, binge ate. And so she talks about how that's kind of what recovery is if we don't do the work to figure out what the substance is doing for our nervous system and recognize that we have to have coping things that we can do when those moments come up. And when the story we tell ourselves to use, right? So like his story was just like, I can't get a break. That's also my story with alcohol a lot, like around alcohol a lot. Like when I feel like I can't get a break, like, oh my gosh, I just can't ever get a break. Then I would turn toward getting super wasted, right? And so the story we tell ourselves to use is often once again, one of those core beliefs. And once that comes up, if we don't know how to tend to that, we're not most likely, but we might go back to using the thing that always helped before.
Yeah. I think I don't know the statistics, but a lot of people will have a co-addiction too. And so for me, I smoked and I drank. And when I quit smoking, when I was like 30, that is when my drinking really kicked in the high gear. Right. And so I'm kind of proud of Bill. I'm going to call him Bill, your person who that you're talking about. That so it's not like he actually ended up just like transferring it to eating. He actually didn't.
No.
So
he was able. It was like kind of something that only happened when the binge eating would only happen when he was drinking.
Yeah,
and it would be the type of food, right? Even types of food help regulate our nervous system. And so like the burgers, the fries, right? After he would be drinking, this was his way of feeling like he got a reward, like in his mind that had been programmed into him. You mentioned cigarettes. I was a smoker for 10 years.
Yeah.
And it took me so long to get out of that mindset that like, cause even as I was dwindling down, like I went from smoking like a pack a day to smoking like a couple a day. And I was really like an undercover smoker. Like I wouldn't smoke around anybody. It would be like the end of the day. This is my end of the day ciggy, this is like my reward. I went the whole day and I was a waitress and, we would be so busy and stuff. It's like, I would be so stressed out the whole night and running from table to table and then just like get off work and just like have my nighttime ciggy. So it's one of those things where, we have it programmed into us that this is a relief. This is a reward because our neurons have programmed it that way, and our nervous system knows. So we have to really do a lot of reprogramming when it comes to recovery and sobriety.
And so if we can agree that, in sobriety, you do have to figure out what the underlying cause is. We can all agree on that. But I think there is not always, but at the beginning, especially going to be a period of white-knuckling. What tools can people use to kind of ride out those cravings and urges and sort of emotional overwhelm without reaching for those old coping strategies? So I always look at it like when I'm really like having a bad kind of like craving or having a bad day, like I'm not going to go for a run. I'm just not. I'm just
that's
like,
so thank you for normalizing that. Yes.
Yeah. Like I'm not. And so,
Yeah.
and I also think that those feelings are normal. There's going to be moments of white knuckling. And so, yeah, there's times where I'll go out and I'll see like, you know, I'll go for a walk in my neighborhood. And I'll see like people outside on a patio drinking, and I'm not inspired to go lift weights and use my healthy coping strategies. So how can we ride out those cravings and urges and sort of overwhelming feelings in the moment? Sometimes when we don't feel like doing like the healthiest thing.
Yeah. Well, what you just mentioned, I think is such an important point to think about. You're talking about two different needs. If you're wanting to relax and needing to decompress, your nervous system's telling you, I want to relax. I need something to detense my body. I need to be in a moment where my brain feels still and quiet. Going for a run is not what your nervous system needs at that moment, right? Like that's forcing your body to do something that your nervous system actually doesn't need. And that's another really good example of something that might lead someone back towards using the substance, because it's like a lot of trauma survivors and people in addiction are so all or nothing. Like if I'm going to be sober, then I'm going to go for a nightly run and I'm going to read a book every day and I am going to do this and do that. So I think a large part of those urges when they come up is being able to say like, I'll do whatever it takes to get through this and not use. So if that means I'm just going to go to bed at 7 p.m. and take a melatonin, that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
If I'm going to take a hot bath every night and turn off all the lights and light one candle and just sit in here, and if I'm going to blast gangster rap and ride down the freeway with all the windows down, screaming at the top of my lungs, that's what I'm going to do. If I'm going to go and if I'm going to go get fast food instead of drinking, go get fast food. I think that's what you have to do at the beginning, especially, is just recognize like right now, I just need to tend to the part of me that wants to drink and do whatever it takes or use and do whatever it takes not to use. If that means saying no to so many other things in my life, I'm going to say no to so many things. I think a lot of people struggling with addiction, they're running themselves to the ground and they're not giving themselves rest. They're not giving themselves space. And they use to kind of, I guess, be able to keep doing that, to keep treating themselves like a machine. And so it really is just about building up what does help me relax that's not alcohol. What is that? Do I have to say no to this party? Do I have to say no to going out to a restaurant right now? Say no.
Yeah.
Order in. Whatever it takes to not use that substance, and really listening to your nervous system and not forcing it to go for a run if what your nervous system needs is like, I just need to go lay in bed and put on a TV show, or I just need to help my body relax with a 2-minute meditation. Think really, really smallly, really, really small.
Yeah.
I think when it comes to like meditation or anything like that, like think really, really small.
And so as we think about that next level up, right, from white knuckling and just getting through the day, what are some kind of actually being in a therapy session practices that you like journaling, creative, anything? What are some of your favorites that you can recommend?
So that, I think, depends on what gets my client into the ventral vagal space. So first, I would encourage your listeners to just think about what gets them into ventral vagal, which once again is safe, connected, curious, compassionate for ourselves and for others. It's not necessarily calm. It's being able to connect with other people. So I would really encourage people to think about what gets me into that space, because it's different for everybody. You mentioned creativity. Creativity is really in that ventral vagal space. You know, I always loved to write, but I don't do it anymore. And when I do, I feel my nervous system feel this ventral vagal space of aliveness and being present, right? in this writing and in this creative outlet. So I'm going to tell myself 5 minutes a day, I'm going to spend writing. And I always encourage people to start really, really small with time stuff, because once time becomes attached to it, it often will become a signal to our nervous system and it will dysregulate us. Like, I have to do this for 30 minutes. It can feel like another chore. So thinking about what gets you into that space and being intentional about spending time there. And sometimes that's just recalling memories and moments of great times in our lives and doing the bilateral tapping back and forth just for a couple minutes. I would also say, so like if exercise and running, exercise for me is huge for coping. Like I have to exercise 4 to 5 times a week in order to be able to manage anxiety and things like that. Like if that is something for people that gets them into that ventral vagal space, exercise. Play is really big. I always ask my clients, like, what makes you feel the most present? What makes you feel the most alive? Like in those moments, you're not thinking about your phone. You're not thinking about what you have to do the next day, and then trying to do more of that. So that's the really biggest piece of it all, is like what works for you and expanding that little by little and making sure you have a daily or almost daily practice of it.
Amber, that like blew my mind just a little bit. And also something that got me was it wasn't just like, you know, what makes you feel safe, but what makes you feel curious. I hadn't thought about that. And then when you said it, I was like, yeah, when I'm curious, I'm happy. I can't be curious when I have anxiety or when I'm freaking out, but it's when I'm calm and in this more peaceful state. Yeah. So that may be a sign for me when I'm curious that something is going right.
Yes. And then being able to say, what moments have I felt curious in? And then how do I put myself in those moments more often?
My God, I love that. Well, thank you so much. I've kept you so long. I have more sections of questions. So I think we're just going to have you back. I have lots of questions about family estrangement. What's up, Mom?
Shout out,
Mom, who's guess what? Not listening.
Oh my gosh, we laugh about that. That's a complex trauma thing too. I'm just making dark jokes about it.
But yeah, I would love to have you back to talk about family estrangement and conflict. And this was amazing. I learned so much.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really enjoyed just talking with you. It's good. I love your input too. So fun.
And thank you all for listening to Sisters in Sobriety, and we'll see you next week. This was Sisters in Sobriety.
Thank you for listening and being with us today.
If you want to learn more about sobriety and meet your community, find us at sistersinsobriety.substack.com.
Are you a sister in sobriety? Then reach out on social media. We'd love to hear from you.
If you're feeling generous, leave us 5 stars and a review and follow us wherever you listen.
You'll never miss an episode. Until next time.